Hello, my name is Alex Koerner. I'm coordinating the electric mobility program at UN Environment in Nairobi. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank first and foremost the organizers of this event, Ministry of Environment, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and SEDAR for inviting UN Environment to this important conference. I think we are all working on the same topic. How can we reduce energy use, air pollution, CO2 emissions and costs coming from the transport sector? I very much appreciated the speech by the Ministry of Environment, because she really nailed it down to the point that we need to establish this kind of ecosystem where every mobility part has to play its role, yeah? And electric vehicles is just one segment of this ecosystem. Yeah? We need public transport, we need non-motorized transport, and we need electric vehicles. And altogether, this can create a transport system which actually saves a lot of costs at the first instance, yeah? And then contributes to better air quality, less CO2 emissions, and all this. So, and the second thing, which I also very much appreciated, it's about people, yeah? It is about having the right capacities, training the right people at the universities, training the people working in government, in academia, in the private sector. So really, I very much like this speech. So I'm going to say a few words about the global state of the art, but really only a few words, then a few words about what UN Environment is actually doing, and then I'm concentrating quite a bit on a financial instrument to actually do electric mobility projects worldwide. That's what I'm going to do. So in the next 30, 40 years, we really see a very rapid growth of vehicles worldwide. But this growth is mainly coming from non-OECD countries, from countries like Egypt, from countries like India, from countries like Brazil, China, South Africa. So really, if we are talking about something like climate change, then this won't be stopped without the contribution of these countries. They are crucial. Also, climate change is one thing, CO2 emissions is one thing, but air pollution is another really important driver to the entire history of how to improve transport. Road transport is a huge contributor to PM emissions, to NOx emissions, to all kinds of air pollutant emissions. And if this is not going to be tackled, life in cities, for example, like Cairo, will be of less and less quality because of that heavy air pollution. Electric mobility actually can be a solution to that, because whatever the electricity mix is, at least air pollution is concentrated to some point, to a few points, which are not in the urban areas. Yeah? Of course, the more you have renewable electricity in the game, the cleaner electricity is, the better electric mobility is, and you tackle various goals at the same time. Not only climate change, but also air pollution and so on and so on. Next slide. So this is just a motivation that really electric mobility can achieve a lot of benefits. That is why UN Environment is working on electric mobility, and we actually created an entire program for this. It's called EMOP. First and foremost, we are looking at reducing energy use, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing air pollutant emissions coming from the transport sector through projects which are focused on developing and transitional countries. So the idea is to support the development of adequate policy packages, to set up pilot projects, to set up demonstration projects, and also to develop strategies on how to finance a transition to electric mobility. For this, another component is also very important. It is about regional replication and outreach. So in each regions there are countries which are more into a certain technology and countries which are less into a certain technology, and it is important to pick the right countries, because then other countries in the region will see that something is functioning and people will train themselves in a certain technology, in a certain achievement. Next slide, please. It is also very important to not only think about passenger cars when talking about electric mobility. Our electric mobility program is actually based on 3 pillars. It's electric 2- and 3-wheelers, basically electric motorcycles, electric tuk-tuks. It's electric passenger cars, but it's also electric buses. And what we realize already is that a lot of the, let's say, low and middle income countries are way more interested in electric 2- and 3-wheelers and in electric buses rather than in electric passenger cars. And this is also clear because these vehicles, they are running high mileages over the year. They are running a lot of kilometers. If you save, and basically with an electric vehicle, you save fuel, you have less expenditures on fuel costs, on maintenance costs. So the more of a certain vehicle is used, the more you can basically save, and the earlier you pay back on the higher investment costs. So that is why these kind of fleet vehicles, be that taxis, be that buses, be that tuk-tuks, be that motorcycle taxis, they are really an important element in the chain to get electric mobility started. Next slide, please. We are pretty much active. We are currently supporting about 40 countries with the introduction of electric mobility. Much of this is very closely related to our initiative, which is called Global Fuel Economy Initiative, because here we are looking at policies, for example, how to incentivize consumers to buy electric vehicles. So many countries, or basically all countries, they are taxing new vehicles, registration tax, import duties, and so on and so on. What we are showing the countries is that you can set up a tax scheme where you get the same revenues, because revenues are important, but you then tax certain characteristics of cars where you can control the market. For example, you introduce taxes based on CO2 emissions or based on fuel consumption for cars. That is also an instrument to actually foster the uptake of electric vehicles, because the electric vehicles would automatically be in a very favorable tax bin in this kind of schemes. Next slide. We have quite a lot of partners, foundations, GCF, JEF, and so on and so forth. We are a bit different compared to many others, to many other groups in UN Environment, since most of our colleagues are financed through extra budgetary projects. So this is something pretty unique within UN Environment. Yeah, next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes is a financial instrument to basically finance electric mobility related projects, for example, in Egypt. It is the JEF7 Electric Mobility Program. What is the JEF? JEF is the Global Environment Facility, which is a financial mechanism. This financial mechanism serves several conventions, for example, UNFCCC, basically climate change. Yeah? So it is a fund where donor countries pay in, and low and middle income countries can get grants. And these grant money can be used to develop projects. Huh? Can we go back, please? The JEF has 3 focal areas. It's climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. We are basically targeting funds which are dedicated to climate change. These funds, which countries can use, are the so-called STAR funds, System of Transparent Allocation of Resources. Countries can apply for these resources and basically use the money to develop projects. JEF operates in 4-year cycles. The last cycle just recently started. October 5 was the deadline for submission of projects for the first round of submissions, and then JEF has submissions each 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, where new projects can be submitted. So basically, we are now targeting countries to develop projects together with us to be submitted in, for example, spring next year. Next slide, please. Within the climate change portfolio, this GEF, the Global Environment Facility, has identified electric mobility as a key mitigation option. And basically, over the next 4 years, they programmed about $100 million as part of the STAR funds, which should be used for electric mobility projects. Whether that will be exactly that $100 million, this is something different, yeah? But that is at least programmed for the time being, yeah? So now, for example, in the case of Egypt, the STAR allocation for the new cycle, which is 2018 to 2022, is about 11 million in total and up to 8 million for climate change. So there is some substantial resources to be used for practical projects. And this is also something very important. We actually are looking at not only producing paper, yeah? Not the 7th strategy for whatever, but really looking into concrete projects, producing feasibility studies for concrete applications of technology, be that buses on a certain route in a certain city, be that electric tuk-tuks serving a certain city in some kind of a low emission zone. Yeah? Really, the idea is to create, to achieve concrete results over the next couple of years. Now, the GEF7 electric mobility program is the actual first ever global program which is looking at electric vehicles. Again, it's focused on electric mobility in low and middle income countries, but we are not prescriptive. Yeah? We are not telling the countries what they should do. It's up to the countries and up to their priorities to decide what they want to do. Yeah? So we are now in contact with about 30 countries, with about 30 different ideas of what they want to do, and we realize that a lot of countries in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, and also in Africa are really looking into finding a, let's say, somehow finding a combination between electric mobility and public transport. And yeah, that is, we actually want to support these countries to develop these kind of projects. If you want to, UN Environment is the link between the money and the project execution on the ground, because we are not there to basically execute the project one by one on a daily basis. Yeah, this is not our task, but we can help to basically develop these projects, and this is what we want to do. Next slide, please. So this new program is not UN Environment alone. Basically, the International Energy Agency is the executor of the so-called global program. The global program will develop materials, will develop trainings. These materials are developed in 4 thematic platforms. Those thematic platforms are arranged around different topics: light-duty vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, recharging infrastructure, and grid and batteries. That are the 4 thematic working groups, and out of these working groups, materials will be generated which can then be used in the countries. The use in the countries will be organized through so-called regional, can you please go back? Last slide, please. Will be organized through regional hubs. There will be a regional hub in Africa, there will be a regional hub in Latin America, there will be a regional hub in Europe and in Asia. And basically these hubs, they will have meetings either biannually or once a year, where all the countries come together, all the country representatives. Might that be from government or from bus operating companies? This is up to you to select who you want to be there, to basically exchange views, build capacity, because these kind of workshops, they will have training sessions, they will have a lot of, let's say, different contents. But the main part of the program is actually the in-country electric mobility projects. Yeah? So like the global program, which is basically bringing all this know-how together, is funded not from the countries, but from other funds provided by GEF, provided by IEA, provided by UN Environment. The STAR allocation money is mostly used to actually do the projects in the country. But then on the other side, this global program still has a benefit because you have a lot of exchange between the countries. That is the idea of the setup. There's about 3 groups of countries we are targeting. Big developing countries like India, like China, countries that play a leading role in their sub-region, for example, Chile in Latin America. Chile is very much advanced with electric vehicles. They just now will have about 200 electric buses in Santiago de Chile on the Trans-Santiago bus rapid transport line by the end of the year. So basically they are already beyond the demonstration phase, but really they realized it is worth paying more upfront but saving over time. And then also the small island developing state. Next slide, please. Just again, kind of a graphical representation of what the global program and the child projects would look like. Global program led by IEA in cooperation with a lot of other agencies such as us. UN Environment has a leading role, but also UNDP, UNIDO is part of that global program. And then the in-country projects, which each and every one is unique, will do different things, but at the end, the exchange of know-how between these countries will be important. Next slide. Again, it is not only about producing paper. It is, of course, standards, regulation, fiscal policies, incentives, all this, having a clear plan for this, developing strategies is very important, yeah? But it is also very important, and it might be even more important to actually learn on the ground by applying certain technologies. And it isn't done with having electric buses in Europe, because it is just not right that you can one by one and transmit those lessons learned to Cairo or to Amman or to Nairobi or to Johannesburg. So each of these cities, they have their very specific background, and it is very beneficial if you can train people on how to maintain an electric bus, on how to set up an operation scheme, on how to do all the things in practice. Next slide. But then this global program has the let's say benefit that really a lot of leading agencies are brought together. Yeah? On the project development side, it's International Energy Agency, UN Environment, UNIDO, UNDP. On the financial side, it's the development banks. Yeah? ADB plays a very big role. European Bank for Reconstruction and Development plays a role. And they are needed because things need to be financed, and we need to think how we can finance electric mobility. For bus operating companies, it's very hard because they usually have little funds. So we need to think about how to create access to capital. And this is also part of this project to actually develop these kind of schemes. And these schemes, they are then very much transposable from one country to the other. Next slide, please. We reach out to a lot of countries. So far, we submitted the global program together with six country projects by October 5. We have letters of interest from a lot of other countries, which are very interesting countries, which are big countries, like China, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, like Ukraine. So basically, there's a lot of interest in joining this program, and for us, it is important to show this interest to the CHEF to basically approve the project at the end. Yeah? So we need to have this buy-in of the countries to say, yes, we are really interested in this kind of program. This is a good opportunity for us to do things on the ground with the granted money from the CHEF. Therefore, we are in discussion with a lot of other countries, and for example, with Egypt. Next slide. Very, very, very quick spotlight on Egypt. Not that I'm going to tell you what is happening here, you know much better than I do, but I just realized the passenger car fleet in Egypt just doubled over the last 10 years. Yeah? And your slide from Sedara showing the diesel fuel consumption in the Greater Cairo bus system also doubled in the last 10 years. Yeah, so there's really a lot of potential to see benefits from electric mobility and to use these benefits. Next slide. What could be potential components of an e-mobility project in Egypt? Of course, a policy component is always important, but then feasibility studies, cost-benefit analysis on concrete projects could be a good starting point. Concrete projects could be to think about electric buses on certain routes, on certain lines in certain city. It could be to think about the introduction of electric tuk-tuks. Even more, and already some speaker this morning mentioned it, industry policies can be a very important part of this. Egypt is already a vehicle manufacturer, so there's a lot of opportunities to actually make this even greater. Because there's some very interesting thing, some kind of shift. To some extent, electric mobility will give a lot of power to developing countries, because a lot of this old knowledge, like gearboxes and combustion engines, which are very complex and very and require long learning, they will lose importance. And this is really a big opportunity for other countries to gain new knowledge and new market share and new importance. Last but not least, raising consumer interest, which is probably the most important thing. Yeah? People just don't know about electric mobility right now, which is why, again, demonstration projects are very important. Next slide. How to join? This is something which needs to be decided in the country, whether or not STAR money should be used on electric mobility. These funds, they are always, it's a very competitive process around using these funds. And many agencies and ministries will develop projects, and then it's up to the actual operational focal point to decide what is the most beneficial thing. So basically, first step would be to decide, yeah, this is a good thing, to decide on a budget. And then second step is to actually develop a project. And UN Environment, for example, would be very happy to support Egypt with the development of such a electric mobility project. Last slide. Next steps. So, as I just said, we submitted the global program and a couple of country projects October 5 to the GEF. We are now waiting for comments from them. We are still on the way to recruit new countries to join this program. We are still on the way to recruit new partners to join this program. If everything goes well, then we could actually start implementation early, mid-2019. That's the idea. Thank you very much for listening.